Across Australia webinar. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Today our in-house experts will present a national picture of urban water accounting and reporting. My name is Claire and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Joining me in the studio to help moderate your questions is our producer Angela. Hi Ange. Hi Claire. Together we will work to make the webinar as interactive as possible. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Most importantly, please note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please use the chat box, not the Q&A box, to send your questions to us during the session, and we will answer as many as possible during the allotted breaks. If you'd like to try out the chat box now, feel free to tell us your name and where you're dialing in from. And at last, I'm pleased to introduce to you our expert presenters, Dr. Vjeko Matic and Dr. Claire McCluskey. Hi Vjeko, hi Claire.
Hi Claire.
Hi Claire.
Sorry, there's two Claires in the room, but Claire McCluskey is the one who will give you all the great information today. Dr. Vjeko Matic has a background in water balance modelling and catchment hydrology for integrated urban water modelling and planning, working for consulting and for local governments in Australia and in the US. Vjeko is a part of the Bureau's Urban Water Unit. The team is responsible for the collection and reporting of urban water data, including water utility performance data for the National Performance Report, water balance information to support the National Water Account, as well as managing data to support web services for water restrictions, climate resilient water sources and water storages. Dr. Claire McCluskey has a wealth of experience in water resource management, ranging from aquatic ecology and hydrological analysis to water accounting. Claire is a part of the team responsible for producing the National Water Account. The National Water Account discloses information about water stores and flows, water rights and water use, and reports on the volumes of water traded, extracted and managed for economic, social, cultural and environmental benefits. Prior to joining the Bureau, Claire worked as an aquatic ecologist in both consulting and research domains. So welcome to everyone. Vjeko and Claire, who would like to tell us what you will be covering today?
That would be me. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Before we get started, just a quick overview of what we'd like to talk about. We'll start with a bit of an introduction to the National Water Account and the National Performance Report. In particular, we want to answer the question, what is urban water? Following that introduction, we'll have some time for some questions, and then we'll run you through some of the highlights from the 2017-18 reporting year. That'll include things like climate, water storages, bills, a whole heap of really interesting information. And then we'll have another opportunity for question time. So now we're going to have a quick poll.
Thank you. And now poll number 1. The question is, has your organisation used these reports before? Option A is for the NPR and National Performance Report. Option B is National Water Account. Option C is if you've used them both, and option D is if you've used neither of them. And please be honest with your answers because it'll help us run the seminar. So, Claire, what sort of information would we find in the National Water Account compared to the National Performance Report?
Well, for starters, someone who is a user of the National Water Account might be interested in information on how much water is available, how much water is used, how much water do we have, how much water was traded. That kind of information is captured in the National Water Account. And for the National Performance Report users, they might be interested in water use per property, pricing or asset performance.
Fantastic. So we've got more than 100 people online today. Welcome everyone. So we'll just keep the poll open for another minute or two. We did see in the chat that people are getting their chats up and running, so that's great. We've got Yuna online from Sydney. Thank you. My other question was, can I flip to the other one? So I had another question myself. I know that we have a lot of drought conditions in much of Eastern Australia at the moment. I'm just wondering how these reports might help us manage those conditions.
So with these reports, having collected data for over 10 years now, the data set allows decision makers to understand how effective different management decisions might be. So for example, if in one region we can see that average water use is higher than in another, it might support the case for government to encourage less water use because it's been demonstrated to be effective elsewhere. So that's sort of the power of that nationwide, the comparison of these reports. Another example is decision makers can start to see emerging long-term trends, and that helps things like predict how much water might be needed in 2 or 3 years' time. So just making our planning a bit stronger.
That's good. So we can see where we've been to try and figure out where to go next. Jen?
Ladies and gents, sorry to cut in there. I did have a question about how to participate in the poll. So the poll should pop up on your screen automatically. For anyone that perhaps has lost that poll or it's disappeared somewhere into your computer, if you click on the little WebEx icon in your bottom toolbar, that should bring it or refresh it back up onto your screen. So I can see that the majority of you have completed that, 64%, but we'll leave it open for another moment for everybody else. And if you're still having issues, no worries at all. Pop it in the chat. We can view your answer from there as well. Might just close the poll off now because I can see the majority of people have voted, and so
we're to share the results then.
Oh yeah, that's great. Beautiful results.
I can see we had 77 out of 100 odd people respond, so that's awesome. What do you think the result might be, Stephen?
Option C, though.
Yeah, hopefully everybody knows everything and they're very familiar with the ways it's got. And a lot of your data might have actually come from some of the people listening today.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. I hope so.
So it comes from all over Australia, yeah?
Yes, yeah. Which we'll be getting into very shortly. Oh, wonderful. All right. I've closed that off and shared those results. So it looks like a lot of people are saying none. Well, it's probably a good thing that they're here. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, not good that they haven't used it, but great that they've dialed in today.
Yeah.
Jessica, maybe you'd like to go on with the conversation and we can have a look at those results as we go.
So Claire.
Oh, sorry, Claire.
That's okay, thank you. So what we wanted to talk about first of all is just what do we mean by urban water. So the Bureau is responsible for 2 reports that report on urban water, the National Water Account and the National Performance Report. The National Performance Report, so urban water within the context of the National Performance Report, is water delivered to residential and non-residential customers by water utilities. That includes, and you can see the map on the right-hand side of your screen, includes the service and operational area of all utilities with greater than 10,000 connections. On the left-hand side, we've got a map of the National Water Account regions, and I'll just quickly explain. The National Water Account reports on 11 regions, but only 6 of those, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, South East Queensland, Sydney and Canberra, are classified as urban regions. And we define urban regions as cities and the extended metropolitan area that host the majority of Australians' population. And the regions are hydrologically defined. So the catchment boundaries essentially define where the region is. So it includes all that urban water that we've talked about for the NPR, but also includes other water users, which we'll talk about a bit more further along in our discussion. So Without further ado, I'll hand over to Vjeko, and he's going to discuss or get into a bit more detail about the similarities and differences between the two reports.
Okay, thank you, Claire. As Claire mentioned, I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about the similarities and differences between the two reports that we're talking about today. At sort of the highest level, the National Water Account is an accounting statement framework, and the National Performance Report is a comparison report for urban utilities. They came about for different reasons. The National Water Account was driven by the Water Act in 2007, and its focus is on urban water entitlement allocations and trade information under regulations, whereas the National Performance Report came about from the National Water Commission. 13 years ago it started, and the Bureau has been hosting it for the last 5 years. And it's overseen by a reference group of state representatives. Before that, it was known as WASA-FASTAC, which is the Water Services Association of Australia. One of the key differences between the two is the utilities who report data. So for the National Water Account, there's 16 utilities from 6 major urban centres that Claire just outlined. Whereas for the National Performance Report, it's 87 utilities, and that's all utilities in all states with more than 10,000 connected properties. The number of indicators and what indicators cover is another key difference between the two reports. So the National Water Account, it collects data and focuses on water, wastewater, recycled water, and stormwater, whereas the National Performance Report collects data on a wider range of indicator classes, and it covers pricing, financial information, customer, environmental, and also health indicators, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. For the 16 utilities who do report to both, the indicator definitions are now fully aligned so that the national MPR indicators can be fully derived from those reported by the National Water Account. That wasn't always the case, but now improvements have been made to align those two. And finally, another key distinction is the reporting precision. So for National Water Account, it reports data at the water body and plant level for each utility. So there's much higher level of detail for the water resource indicators, and the MPR only reports data at the utility level, but the trade-off there is that it covers more utilities in a larger part of the nation. In terms of customers, the National Water Account is typically kind of targeted more for policy and decision makers in policy and planning, and also researchers, where the National Performance Report, it was originally sort of developed to target regulators and utilities to provide useful information for them, but it's actually going under a review at the moment to sort of determine who are the customers and needs for the data and how it can better be refined and presented for greater value to the industry. So next few slides, we're just going to quickly walk through the structure of the two reports, just to give the audience a bit of a sense of what information they can expect to find in both, and starting with the National Performance Report. So MPR is split into two parts, Part A, Part B. Part A is the comparison report for benchmarking, and Part B is the full time series and data set, and they're both downloadable from the MPR website. The Part A features 9 chapters, and each chapter is a different indicator class, and it only pulls out 15 of the 166 indicators, which are the most important indicators of use for the industry for benchmarking. So the chapters are water resources, assets, which covers things like losses and leaks and breaks. There's customer indicators, which includes number of complaints, service interruption frequency and duration, environmental indicators, which have information on greenhouse gas emissions and water treatment levels, pricing information, including pricing structure and typical annual residential bills, which I'll go into more detail in some of these in future slides. There's information on finance, so revenue and capital and operational expenditure, and also public health indicators, so mostly around water quality compliance results. One sort of important element of the National Performance Report is the way that it presents the comparisons, and that's through utility group sizing. So we have major, large, medium and small utility groups. An example of major groups are the major urban areas, so Sydney, Melbourne and Perth. A large utility group includes cities like Darwin and Townsville. Medium includes mainly regional towns like Albury and Coffs Harbour, and small utilities are those with 10,000 to 50,000 property connections. And Armidale is the smallest and newest addition, which is reported to the NPR for the first time this year, as it's reached that 10,000 property connection threshold. So I'll hand over now back to Claire, and she's going to run us through some of the structure of the National Water Account. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Gecko. One thing that's probably worth mentioning is that the National Performance Report is in PDF format and it's available on the Bureau's website. The National Water Account is actually an online publication, so you actually need to go to the internet to access it. What I'll do now is just take you for a quick tour through the National Water Account report structure. Just want to highlight the depth and the usefulness of the information that's contained within it. Shown on screen right now is the menu that you access the National Water Account, and that essentially serves as a table of contents for the report. I won't be going into what is water accounting today, which underpins the National Water Account. Last year we actually gave a seminar that went into that in a bit of detail, so if you're interested, please dig that up and have a look. But probably like to just answer the question, why water accounting? And that is, it's a very robust approach to providing nationally consistent and comparable information across jurisdictions. So across the 6 urban regions in this case, we're able to answer some key questions like how much water do we have? How much water did we use? So a quick tour, starting with the key findings. This summarises key information, including climate, and it puts it in the context of recent years and or the long-term average. Just got Perth as our worst example here. Moving on, we also have climate and water. Now this is relatively self-explanatory, but quite important to understanding water use behaviours. There's quite a detailed summary of climatic information relevant to water availability. It includes information on soil moisture, stream flows, evapotranspiration and rainfall. The next part of our report are the water accounting statements. These present the volumes or numbers for the region, and essentially it presents the net position of the region, which might be used a proxy for water security. Also presents the inflows and outflows to a region. So in this example here, we've got inflows to the urban system. So for the Perth region, just showing how much water came into the urban system from different sources, so desalinated water, surface water, groundwater. The next part of the report is our supporting information. So that goes on to explain the volumes reported in the water accounting statements in a lot more detail, puts it in context of the climate for the year, and compares it to recent years and long-term averages. And also includes information on environmental flows, and there's also an option for data request if you're interested in more data from the National Water Account. A couple more sections. The region description is a wealth of information. There's a heap of background and contextual information that supports the report. It includes information such as population, water resources that are dominant in the region, land use, water management, so what kind of legislation is in place in the region and who are the authorities responsible for implementing that. And final section of the report is the reference information. Probably of interest here is that we provide detailed methods on every volume that we report within the National Water Account. So thank you for your patience with us in getting through the report structures. We hope you've learned a lot so far. We're going to have a short poll question, I think, and then followed by some question and answers.
Poll time again. So I've now launched that, ladies and gentlemen. You should see that on your screens. But once again, if you can't or don't, or there's been a little hiccup, you can always engage with us in the chat box again. So we'll leave that open for a few moments, let everyone get their responses in, which they're all doing rather quickly now, which is great. What are you guys expecting to see at the end of this poll?
Well, based on the results of the Twitter poll, Canberra.
Oh yeah, ladies and gentlemen, our social media team did post this on Twitter. Some of you may have seen if you're following us on Twitter, and Canberra was certainly the most popular answer choice then, followed by Adelaide. But I don't know, I wonder if our listeners in this webinar will feel the same.
We had a lovely comment from Jay come through while Claire was speaking. Do you want to
Yes, we did. Jay, thank you for engaging with us. And Jay was just mentioning that NPR is an excellent example of transparency in utility industries, saying also that it's a shame that we don't have the same for energy utilities. So that's great to know. Thank you, Jay.
And we've been doing the NPR for a few years now.
Yeah,
right?
5 years at the Bureau and 13 years altogether.
So we're getting some good stats about what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, that's right. We'll go into a bit of detail about those.
Coming, Jay. You'll find out more.
All righty. Well, we'll give everyone, should we still give them another moment to fill in the poll, or should we close it?
We've had 73 people vote out of 100 odd listeners, so that's not too bad. Who do you, I'm not going to ask you guys because you know the answer, and I'm hoping the answer is B, but that's because I have a personal interest. But yeah. I wonder, do you know whether that answer's changed over the years? Have the rankings changed?
They've been pretty consistent for at least one state. For terms of major urban centre, I'm not 100% sure, but
okay.
can reveal.
Okay.
Momentarily.
Andrew's just closing the poll now. Hopefully the results will pop up on the screen in front of you in about 30 seconds, and then we'll go on and hear more.
He's giving me a countdown here. 6, 5, 4, 3. The anticipation is killing me. Righty. Poll results. Apply now. Can everyone see those results? Let us know.
There you go. So the answer is Canberra. So that's what our listeners think. What is the real answer?
The correct answer is actually Melbourne. So, I hope I didn't throw people off with my Twitter comment.
That's my personal favourite. But yes, so the good thing is that our listeners chose Melbourne as the second most popular choice.
Very close.
So 30 people chose Canberra and 27 chose Melbourne. So we've got a pretty informed audience, and I'm particularly pleased with that answer. That's awesome. Let's go on with the talk.
Okay. So now we're just going to go through some of the highlights from the 2017-18 year. So that's from the 1st of July 2017 to the 30th of June 2018, and just tell the story of what happened during that year. So we start off with the climate, as you can see on the screen. And what we have here is rainfall and temperature. And just to summarise, we've got below average rainfall across most of southeastern Australia, and that includes Adelaide, Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney. And if you look at the map on your left-hand side of your screen, you can see some really dark red patches in the Sydney region, and that's showing us that annual rainfall in some parts of Sydney was the lowest on record. Below average rainfall was not the case for Perth, which was quite unusual. Perth is typically quite dry, and Perth actually recorded annual rainfall that was average. Might not sound so exciting, but that was the highest in 6 years. So quite interesting there. Looking on the right-hand side of your screen, mean maximum temperature was mostly above average. Again, in parts of Sydney, highest on record. More than 90% of Australia reported daytime temperatures in the highest 10% of historical observations. So to summarise, it was mostly warm and dry for the 2017-18 year.
And just to reiterate all the stats that we're going to look at, just like last year's tax return, this is last year's water return, yeah? So it's the end of June.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. So following on from our previous slide about climate, the information you see here is presented in the National Water Account in the supporting information, if you recall what I talked about earlier. What I want to show you here is the storage volumes at the end of that water year, so at the end of 2017-18, and the trend in storage volumes for the previous 3 years. And just a bit more explanation to understand what's on the screen. the volume reported for each region, so Perth or whatever region we're looking at, is the aggregate volume of all storages within that region. And why is this useful? Well, it gives us an understanding of water availability, so certainly surface water availability. It reflects the climate that we've experienced, and it's comparable across those urban regions. So again, that's sort of nationally consistent, comparable information. So to summarise what's happening here, the warm and dry conditions resulted in a decrease in storage volumes for Adelaide, Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney. In fact, end-of-year storages in Melbourne and Sydney were the lowest since 2010, so it's quite an interesting result. In Perth, storage volumes actually increased, and that was a combination of improved rainfall conditions, but also the way the storages are managed in the Perth region. And the end-of-year storage volume of 45% was the highest in more than 20 years, so quite another interesting result. For South East Queensland, despite below average rainfall, storage volumes increased, and that was mainly due to high inflows from rainfall events in late February 2018. We thought we'd preempt a question about storage volumes now and present that information now. So this is not in the National Water Account that was reported for 2017-18. What we have on screen here is to show you the 9 months since the end of the 2018 year. So it's the same format as the previous slide, and just to show you what's happened since, South East Queensland, Sydney and Canberra, all of those have experienced a drop in storage around 10%. Perth has increased, Adelaide a very moderate decline, and Melbourne's only dropped by 1%.
So that's the current storage for at least 5 of our capital cities.
Yes, yep. That's right, yeah. Yep.
So they're about half, not quite, most of them.
A little bit above half, except for the West or Perth and Adelaide, yeah. And this is just providing an insight for that. The next year that we'll be reporting on that 2018-19 year. And it's not surprising given that the dry conditions have prevailed, the last few months.
Thank you.
So this next slide, and once again, all of this information is in the National Water Account in supporting information area. This actually shows the mix in sources of water used in the different regions. So as you can see, surface water is the dominant source of water in all urban regions except for Perth. And then we've got another graph here, which is a bar chart, and that shows the mix of water sources used over the past 7 years. So it's showing us the sort of change in the volume of water supplied and the mix of those water sources. So we can see from this graph that water sourced for the urban systems in Adelaide, Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, and you're probably detecting a theme here, those are the ones that experience those dry conditions, was 5 to 9% higher than last year. In Melbourne, if you can see the screen, desalination production reduced compared to the previous year, and we had an increase in what we refer to as inter-region supply. So that's water delivered from Thomson Reservoir, because that's considered outside those catchment boundaries of the Melbourne region. In Adelaide, again, we also had a similar situation, so an increase in inter-region supply. So Adelaide used River Murray water, and when surface water availability decreases, which happens when it's dry, they tend to increase their reliance on that River Murray water, so you can see that there. And in Perth, desalinated water and groundwater continue to underpin the urban water supply. So I'm just going to touch briefly on some information that's available in the National Water Account that's not in the National Performance Report, and that's information related to water rights and entitlements, as well as water allocations and trade. So volume of water allocated in a year and the proportion of allocated water used is useful information to understand general water availability in the region. So basically it kind of tells us who is entitled to use water, or who owns the water, when and under what conditions. So key points here to take home is a total water allocation of 3,518 gigalitres, that's combined surface water, groundwater. Water use as a proportion of the allocated water increased compared to previous years, and that's reflecting those dry conditions.
Claire, before we go on, we had a quick question from Dennis. He said storage volumes in previous slide, just surface storage.
Yes, surface water storage. Sorry, I probably should have clarified that. Yes, just the surface water storage.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yep. Jumping on to our next slide, water use, and this is the last you'll hear from me. This particular graphic here is illustrating another difference between the National Performance Report and the National Water Account. So National Water Account includes urban water use and other uses here. So what we can see from this slide is that at a national level, urban water use accounts for 73% of total water use across those 6 regions. The next major user is what's described here as individual users, and that typically includes industrial, commercial and agricultural sectors. As we move further west from Adelaide to Perth, this pattern shifts towards individual users making up a larger proportion of total water use. So that's just a summary of some of the information that you'll find in the National Water Account. And I'm going to hand over to Vieko now, who'll also be talking about urban water use, but from a National Performance Report perspective.
Okay, thank you, Claire. This next slide, we are continuing the story about national water use, and also sort of shows some of the differences between the NPR and NWA. So here, the water use, we present it as per property, and here I'm showing it against average annual residential bill. So this is just kind of to show off some of the great data that we have and some of the stories that people can get out of these complementary data sets. So on the top, we have average national water use per property over the last 11 years, and below is the annual average residential bill per property also over the same time period. And so what's just an example of an interesting trend, we see that the average water use doesn't really change too much over the last 11 years, but whereas the bills in the first 7 years, there's a steady increase, and then it stabilises in the last 4 years. So this is probably likely due to various government initiatives around fair bills and regulator pricing decisions which are related to things like operational cost saving measures. So that's just another sort of insight into water use that complements the National Water Account data. Continuing water use and bills, but sort of looking at regional trends. One of the potential interesting sort of impacts of climate is seen in New South Wales, where only 2 utilities reported median bills lower than last year, and only 3 reported median bills lower than their 4-year average. It's interesting, the report also showed that in Sydney, which also experienced dry, warm conditions, despite a significant increase in water use, so Sydney saw a significant departure from its long-term average. Their bills actually remain the same, and that's a really good outcome for a really large sort of customer base of Sydney Water and large portion of Australia.
Sydney would be happy to hear that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, really good result. Yeah. So considering the dry conditions, in Adelaide reported the highest increase in water use compared to the previous year for any major urban centre, and it probably was related to the dry conditions, but it's also part of the fact that the previous year they reported water use well below their long-term average. And so overall, Adelaide water use is probably around their average use. Melbourne residents use the least amount of water per property, and Victorian utilities continue to charge the least to their customers, which is an ongoing trend. That result is likely a combination of low water use through demand management, things like setting targets and encouraging that through educational programs, and relatively higher rainfalls and lower temperatures in Victoria, and also the state government's Fair Water Bills initiative. So, and then finally, another interesting result reported this year was in Western Australia. There was a 6% increase in the bills despite average conditions, and this is most likely due to the state government's decision to increase charges on utilities, and that's just an example. So together these sort of show that it's both climate and regulatory decisions which are sort of the 2 governing factors that determine bills. So next I'm going to talk about recycled water, which is a key performance indicator highlighted in an MPR. So recycled water nationally, there was an 11% increase in recycled water production in major urban areas, and nationally a 5% increase for all the MPR regions. Over a longer term, we see a continued increase nationally in recycled water production capacity, and this just reflects the ongoing continued investment in climate resilient water sources. But what is interesting that we see from MPR data is that despite a sort of long-term increase, gradual and steady increase, the year-to-year use can be highly variable, and that's particularly the case for the smaller utility groups. So whereas for the major utility groups like Sydney and Melbourne and the big cities, their recycled water capacity and production tends to be about the same every year with just a slow increase, but the smaller groups, we can see really high variability between different years, and that's just a function of the ability for utilities to be able to turn on and off their recycling water systems based on their sort of forecasted demand for each year. So, and now the last class of performance indicator we're going to talk about from the National Performance Report is the asset class, and in particular looking at leaks and breaks. So leaks and breaks is valuable information for utilities because pipe network maintenance can be a very large proportion of their operational and capital expenditure. Pipe leaks and breaks are often associated with changes in soil moisture conditions, so that's either an increase or a decrease in soil moisture from previous years, and particularly in areas with clay soils that can really expand and change the soil structure, and also the age of the network. So the MPR results show very clearly that big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, every year they report orders of magnitude higher breaks per kilometre than the smaller areas, and this is mainly because of the age of their pipe infrastructure. Then regarding the influence of climate, in New South Wales, where we saw the driest and warmest areas, we would expect to see maybe a response in the reporting of the asset leaks and breaks. However, interestingly, only 50% of New South Wales utilities did report an increase in mains leaks and breaks, and that may be due to the fact that many regional utilities are smaller and newer areas with more robust pipe networks. So, yeah, in summary, this just sort of highlights that climate and infrastructure are the two kind of driving things that govern asset leaks and breaks. But this year, we really see that the condition of the networks seems to dominate the results.
Thank you. That's great. There's lots of good insights in that. Well, we're getting some good questions coming through, and please, now's your time to send them through on the chat if you'd like to quiz our experts in the room. We're going to start with Ben. Ben, way back, said you showed me the rainfall map, but you chopped off the top of Australia. Why did you do that? I'm guessing he has a particular interest in the top of Australia.
So that was me. I'll take responsibility for that. So the reason why that was just chopped off is we were just, if you refer to one of the first slides where we talked about urban water, for the National Water Account, we classify the urban regions as Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra and South East Queensland. So we do report on other parts of Australia, and we certainly do have that information on other parts of Australia, but just for the purpose of providing a nice and clear map that focused in on those urban regions, we cut off Northern Australia. So apologies for that. I was very sorry.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jay. For future releases, could you please also the authors to extend the Part B of NPR to cover some basic met data such as rainfall and temperature utility level, as these are critical for water utility performance? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. That's a good question or recommendation. As I mentioned earlier, the NPR is currently under review to see sort of what additional ancillary information can be provided to give users more information, and yeah, I think that's something that could definitely be considered. And there's a process where you can submit recommendations for the MPR review as well. We'll share some information in the future slide where you can get in contact with us directly for good ideas like that. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. Our next question comes from Harry. Do we have Harry's question?
It's
sorry. Could you please discuss or elaborate accounting for recycled water?
Okay.
I could start with just to summarise in terms of what information you can expect for recycled water accounting. So National Water Account has data at the plant level. So if you're interested in the precision of how much is being produced for various plants within a utility for the 6 major urban centres, you would look to the National Water Account. But if you want to look at sort of a more national picture for the 87 utilities, then you could look at the MPR. But again, that just reports recycled water at the utility level. So
and I'd probably expand on that by saying, and I'm going to guess that perhaps you're referring to the slide where we talked about the sources of water. Certainly from the National Water Account perspective, and recycled water was missing. And that just comes down to the way we interpret and treat the data. So we do, in the National Water Account, do report on recycled water, but it's presented as an outflow from our urban system, and so we do present how much recycled water is produced and then delivered onto customers.
Thank you. We also had an extra comment back to Ben about the rainfall map that the Bureau's website has heaps of information on rainfall and temperature, and you can get the full map with all of Australia included if you would like. So it's definitely there.
Oh, absolutely.
And that information's there for sure.
The National Water Account, the final release, will be coming up in a couple of months' time, and we will have that information and the full map of Australia.
Thank you. Our next question comes from David. We are recording storage and we know approximate rainfall, so can we report on water that is lost to evaporation and poor capture retention infrastructure?
I can answer part of that. So the National Water Account does report volumes lost to evaporation. So that's in the water accounting statements that I referred to earlier. With regards to the bit about poor capture retention infrastructure, I don't really feel qualified to comment on that. It's probably outside the scope of the National Water Account, but if that's information that's useful to people, can certainly consider how we could potentially improve our report to, I suppose, support that information need.
Thank you. We had a question from Helen. She asked, how do we define what is meant by recycled water?
Well, that's a really good question. The way that we sort of deal with it is basically any treated wastewater that goes on to have a use other than a discharge is considered a recycled water volume in a nutshell. So discharges might be to the sea or to a river or just to a landscape, but anything that has sort of a use like agriculture, residential, commercial, then that would be considered recycled water.
Thank you. A question from Dan. Apologies, I might have missed this explanation. Why are there no overall values presented for Queensland, only South East Queensland?
So in the results that we presented from the National Water Account perspective, just going back to that, how we've grouped our regions. So South East Queensland is considered an urban region. The other parts of Queensland that we report on, which includes the Burdekin and Fitzroy regions, are considered within that urban classification. So certainly that information is available. It just wasn't part of today's presentation.
Thank you. The next question is from Anne-Marie. She said, the breaks are generally related to the change of wet to dry, and it has been consistently dry, so not as impacting on breaks and leaks?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the sort of commentary in our reports is very superficial. We tend to just sort of report on results and trends, and we do shy away from sort of drawing any big conclusions about things like that. But I think that statement probably is in line with the results that we saw, which was that it's probably the infrastructure condition that seems to be sort of dominating the results that we see at the moment, and that I think would be in line with that assessment that we've had continuing dry periods and not a lot of change. So, yeah.
Thank you. Colin's asking, will fluoridation status and data be included in the future NPRs? Interesting.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, it's under review, and that review may or may not include addition to indicators and with enough interest from customers and users. If that was demonstrated, that's possible, but I'm not sure.
Great, thank you. Richard asked for what's an LGA?
Local government.
Thank you. For LGAs that divert and reuse stormwater runoff, do these users get tracked or reported on?
Okay, that's a very good question, and we're actually internally reviewing the Bureau's role in reporting stormwater. There is not for local governments, no, in short. Utilities, some of them do host and have harvesting systems, and we report them, but we do understand that stormwater reuse is probably being categorically underreported in these reports, and we're sort of looking into what opportunities there are to expand our reports to include what is a really important alternative water resource. And
Fantastic, thank you. Dennis asked, any future plan to capture metrics for smaller utilities, particularly relating to recycled water, stormwater harvesting and managed aquifer recharge?
Well,
you're talking your talk, aren't they?
So every state has something that's sort of an equivalent of the NPR, which will cover all of their utilities. So that data is captured there. And again, in the review of the NPR, I think there has been some discussion about expanding the inclusion, and it may or may not include small utilities. So that's to be seen. Related to what I was just saying, there's going to be a review of the opportunity to include more information on things like stormwater and stuff and managed aquifer recharge, which there's a lot of interest for, and I think that's a really exciting upcoming space.
Yeah, I know it's all under review. Can people contribute to the review if they want to?
You can contact us. We're going to share our contact information at the end.
Actually, I put it in the chat before. You might, some of you may have seen it there, but we'll certainly copy and paste that back in, and you'll also see it in the presentation.
Yeah, so anybody who's interested in the review process, you can just get in touch through urban.water@om.gov through our email inbox, and we'll direct you to that.
So maybe Colin can send in his fluoridation suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Thank you. We had a comment from David. Thank you all for your diligence in helping us to better understand the accounting and reporting re-water in Australia. This work is of unspeakable value. So congratulations on your hard work. And thank you to all the contributors of the data, right? Some of them who might be on line at the moment.
Many people that are involved in this process.
We know, we saw Georgina at the start of the webinar from the Water Corp, didn't we? And she told us that she uses the NPR, so that's great, the National Performance Report. We have a question from Helen. Is it the NPR reference group who informs new information that will be included? Does that make sense to you?
But understanding, sorry,
I think you're talking about the National Performance Report Review. Right. Is it the reference group who informs that new information?
So it is the reference group makes decisions on the inclusion at the end, but at the moment it's going through a larger industry consultation to get input from all of the identified stakeholders who get value from it, and then there'll be a recommendation and process, and then the RTG represent the key stakeholders who fund and oversee it. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we've got a couple more minutes for questions, so if you've got a burning question, make sure you send it straight through to us now in the chat function. For our experts, from Samuel, is there any assessment of the condition, health and outlook of the Great Artesian?
It's funny you should ask that, Samuel. We're currently scoping a national water account for the Great Artesian Basin. So it's just preliminary phases at the moment, but certainly it's something that we're considering reporting on. And if you watch this space, hopefully we'll have something for you in the next 12 to 18 months.
Fantastic, thank you. From Colin, will asbestos cement pipes, kilometres and AC main bursts be tracked?
They're not currently, and but yeah, again, that's just something else that potentially could be included in the review, but good submissions welcome.
Thank you. Another question. Who is responsible for groundwater allocation for councils and for individuals?
So typically it's the Water Management Authority. It varies across jurisdictions. So if the question is relevant to who actually makes the allocations, it's generally, so for example, Victoria Southern Rural Water will make an allocation announcement against the groundwater. So that's how they generally operate. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Another question, how was the increase in recycled water in Melbourne measured? Was the water used? This is from Michael.
We summed the water supplied, which was reported by the utility, so that implies use as opposed to just production from the plant. So it was the water that was delivered to different users, and that's reported for 5 of the major Melbourne utilities.
Thank you. We have a long question from Edward. Here we go. I am not familiar with NPR. I assume it is compulsory for water utilities to send data to BOM. Is that correct? Also, in the NPR, do you aggregate or separate data per utility? I assume water utilities produce their own reports besides NPR. So I think that's 3 questions. Thanks for the top.
So it's not compulsory in the way that the National Water Account data is under regulation, but typically it's the state jurisdictional coordinators manage the enforcement of it, and my understanding is that they require reporting as part of their license requirements. So a utility who wants to maintain their state license, part of that is to report this data to the Bureau. There's different...
kind of makes it compulsory then? They can't operate?
Not all states use that. That's one example.
Yep, thank you.
So, and then we do so it's aggregated. The data is reported by utility, and then we aggregate it into the utility size groups for the purpose of comparison. So that was the 4 groups that we discussed before, so the major, large, medium, and small, and that's just to make that kind of comparison between utilities kind of standardized against their customer base. And then the final question, I think, so
this is about producing their own reports.
I think in particular what we hear is that the larger utilities who will more likely to have their internal sort of analysis capabilities will produce their own reports. States certainly have their own reports, but we hear that smaller utilities in particular do really rely on the NPR and their sort of state reports for their own reporting and business sort of understanding.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your questions. Fieko, would you like to just summarise your talk before we come to the end?
Okay. So thank you for everybody who attended. So in summary, urban water can have many different meanings, and we hope that we've sort of given a good overview of how the information can be sort of chopped and changed for different uses. National Water Account reports water flows, availability, allocation and water use, whereas the National Performance Report provides performance comparison for urban water utilities. In the reporting year 2017-18, the highlights that we chose to share today, mostly warm and dry across urban Australia. Total water use increased. Average residential use was stable, which is great, and then the bills have stabilised in the last 4 years. Storage volumes and water availability continues to decrease, and it's predicted to continue. And recycled water production nationally continues to increase, but with high inter-year variability. So thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Fieko.
And then finally, just for anyone who's interested in more information, these are the websites where you can directly access the National Water Account, the Performance Report. There's the Storages dashboard, which we rely on for a lot of the information to support the reports. And then there's some email addresses there if you want to get in touch with us with any further questions or requests for more information. We'd be happy to help. And also, please don't forget to engage with us on social media and look out for our next webinar. Do you guys?
Fantastic. And there's the 2 emails that we mentioned earlier. So if your questions about NPR, email Urban Water. bom.gov.au, or if it's about the National Water Account inquiries with underscores at bom.gov.au. So all those emails will be in the recording in case you didn't get a chance to note them down. So that brings us to our next BOM webinar, which will be on the 16th of April, which is on the topic of using the new design rainfall through Australia. So if you're keen to learn about that, please make sure that you register.
And we've actually popped that direct registration link into the chat for anyone super keen who wants to do that immediately.
The button now. So a big thank you to Vieko and Claire for your time today and all your work in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Claire and Angie.
Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in and joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you would like to continue the conversation, please use the hashtag BOMWebinars in your LinkedIn posts. As mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded and we will have the video ready for your on-demand viewing pleasure in the next few days, so watch this space. If you've registered, we'll send you an email with the link. And finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. So once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete that for us anonymously. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hopefully we'll see you next time.